On August 25th, 2021, Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin III issued a memorandum for mandatory coronavirus disease 2019 vaccination of Department of Defense service members, according to their press release at DoD, directing the secretaries of the military departments to immediately begin full vaccination of all members of the armed forces under DoD authority on active duty or in the ready reserve, including the National Guard, who were not fully vaccinated against COVID-19. And at that time, the secretaries of the military departments were also directed to impose ambitious timelines for implementation and to report regularly on vaccination completion using established systems for other mandatory vaccine reporting. Indicative that if you did not comply with this directive, this would be an evaluation item that could be held against you if you were trying to make your packets for promotion look good. So there was just a little evolutionary pressure for those seeking careers in the military to follow these orders. To date, in the Department of Defense, they proudly display at the top of their COVID-19 response dashboard that at a total of 8,678,939 doses have been distributed. And among the uniformed service members serving on active duty in the reserve component forces and the National Guards, a total of 1,997,404 have been documented as holding the status of quote-unquote fully vaccinated, with another 28,017 in the status of partially vaccinated as of September 14th, 2022. Over a year since the Pfizer COVID-19 countermeasures products, and I say that for a reason, that had been approved for private label marketing, and I say that for a reason, by the FDA, had been approved on August 23rd, 2021. Important date. And at least in law terminology and pertinent facts, material facts, are important. But for the next few minutes, we're going to put a face on these numbers to some extent to facilitate understanding of the impact of the message to the force warning order from the Defense Secretary, retired Army General Lloyd Austin III, who, as some are aware, had received a waiver so that he could serve as Defense Secretary. His warning order was issued on August 9th, 2021. And perhaps you have not seen the story in Military Times, but you may have seen the interview on Fox News with Tucker Carlson about U.S. Air Force Master Sergeant Nick Cuppert, who had requested a religious exemption from the vaccine mandates, was denied that exemption, that religious exemption, and just before the interview was informed by his chain of command that the Air Force was going to begin processing his separation from the military after 19 years of commendable military service, with just 1 year remaining before qualifying for a retirement, and with what is described as an other than honorable discharge, or not an honorable discharge, sometimes referred to as a general discharge, which is distinct from bad conduct discharge, but also in that category, and also dishonorable discharge. And this adversely impacts any veteran's benefits for which he might be eligible and qualify, including medical benefits for one of his dependents. One of the things upon which he had indicated that he would have been relying upon his separation when he was fully retired. It is an emotionally gripping story, However, in the courts, emotions do not win legal arguments. And there are tragic hardship stories every day in the courts. And I would rather be happy because I win than crying all the way until I lost. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, a retired field grade U.S. Army officer and a former legal specialist as enlisted in the 75th Ranger Regiment, where I had the truly unique opportunity to be the chief legal advisor to a Ranger Battalion commander who has a special courts-martial convening authority, a delegation of power usually reserved for a commissioned officer in the rank of full colonel, which he was not. He was a lieutenant colonel. He also possessed what is described as summary release authority for the Ranger Regiment, so that he could not only initiate the process for separating soldiers from the U.S. Army, but could also remove soldiers from the elite Ranger Regiment, which is unique to that special operations unit. You will not find that practically anywhere else. And in that process, I became intimately familiar with the procedures, regulations, relevant laws, ins and outs that apply to these types of transactions, and became well acquainted with not only what a commander could do, but also what he could not do. And generally, when a commander finds out that his career is on the line, he's probably not going to do that. So for the next few moments, we shall be discussing primarily the material facts of importance in the courts, particularly with regard to the military and the connection of those facts with the controlling law, because this is the most effective way to help Master Sergeant Cupper and the tens of thousands of soldiers also affected by soldiers, airmen, Marines, and sailors that are affected by these mandates. Less than 25% of age-eligible, able-bodied Americans are eligible to serve in the military because of education, fitness, and criminal record, making them rather exceptional from the start. And less than 1% of Americans are inclined to go further to make that commitment to defend this nation, put on that uniform through hardship, personal sacrifice, and great potential for risk of rendering that ultimate sacrifice, which, at least I believe, makes them rather heroic individuals, because the reality is that free men will fight for their freedom, and that's what makes them free. But slaves follow orders, and that, by definition, is what keeps them in slavery. Yet soldiers accept that fight for most of us who enjoy freedom, for which all should be grateful. And one of those freedoms is the First Amendment, the very first liberty in the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And in the 1970s, when my father was a chaplain in the New Jersey National Guard, and not long after Cassius Clay had gone all the way to the Supreme Court to avoid the draft during the conflict in Southeast Asia as a conscientious objector on the rationale that it was not sanctioned under jihad, many in the Islamic faith came to the military and demanded an accommodation for their religion to observe the call of prayer, which was a disruption to the order and discipline of the military, but that accommodation was granted. At that time, with an armed conflict still raging in Southeast Asia, the military could have refused that accommodation very easily, while those soldiers with a sincerely held faith belief could have held true to their convictions and observed their religious practice, but faced the penalty of being charged with absence without leave, or AWOL under Article 86 UCMJ, with a potential for administrative separation, which is separate, after non-judicial punishment. Or a court-martial could have been convened that could have placed them in prison, and or separated the soldier with a bad conduct or honorable discharge. This is called due process, an entitlement to a hearing, an opportunity to be heard in a meaningful time and in a meaningful way. But that did not occur then, or even when Sikhs began in the 1990s to request an accommodation regarding military headgear and grooming standards so that they could wear beards. And again, good discipline and order were subordinated to their claims for religious liberty. But now, because of a disease not even likely to present a threat of grave bodily harm or death to any young and physically fit airman, marine, sailor, or soldier, having after over 2 years found less than 100 fatalities in the total force, a number less than the number of deaths attributed to accidents, suicides, and drug-related deaths on Fort Bragg alone, even finding members of the Reserve and National Guard with a lower risk of fatality than the general population, there is a mandate for vaccinations, and a religious accommodation cannot be made, which is projected to separate over 10% of the military force, while some continue to indicate the possibility of World War III in the Ukraine, which will have a serious impact on military readiness. And unless you are willing to take the place of the Master Sergeant Nix, this situation affects not just those currently serving in uniform to protect your freedoms, but affects you and your choice that you probably wanted to avoid. The president during the 2020 elections had stated that in pandemic it is not about your rights. And in the record-breaking election, some have claimed he won fair and square. You signed on to that proposition. It is not about your rights, and religious freedom comes second to a pandemic, regardless of any oath to preserve and protect the Constitution, apparently. And those were the same arguments that were made during the civil rights struggle in cases like Edwards v. South Carolina, where many segregationists argued that something had to be done for safety from those insurrectionaries, arguments we hear today. But if you believe in rights and the liberties guaranteed by the Constitution, there is actually a process to be followed, even before these soldiers can be separated, and that entitles them to due process, like a hearing. No soldiers yet have been charged under court-martial and separated from the military. And when the military refrains from a home court advantage in a court-martial, there is probably a very good reason for that. They would lose that argument in their own court on challenging what had amounted to an unlawful order. And even for those soldiers being separated under any other circumstances, including for medical reasons, there is a retention board provided to determine, on the whole record, in view of the entire evidence, whether those soldiers should still be retained. A process denied to soldiers like Master Sergeant Nick, only because they exercised their freedom of religion at the wrong time, while apparently in the past Muslims and Sikhs exercised their religion at the right time, when the military was willing to change itself, even through wars, to conform in accommodation to their religious preferences, which at least to me just doesn't quite sound fair and equitable. In somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right, and it's time to make America great again. Surrender is not a Ranger word. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for Congress. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. Carry on.